Now, your weather forecast from the forecasters at 91.3 WCRD.
Good evening, this is weather forecaster Morgan Strackvine here with your evening weather update. Today we reached only 37 degrees, so just a reminder not to put away your winter gear just yet. As for tonight, we will have mostly clear skies with winds varying from the west at around 10 to 15 miles per hour. We will be dropping to the mid to lower 30s into tomorrow morning. And for those of you lucky enough to be out and about at 8 a.m., remember your coats as it will be 31 degrees. It might even be a good idea to layer as it will be mostly sunny tomorrow and a high of 44 degrees. Feeling just a little bit better than today, luckily. If you want to know more about the weather and get more updates, you can give us a follow on Twitter at WCRDWX.
Good evening and welcome to the Fantasy Express. We are back on this fine Wednesday evening. I'm your host, Steven Sobek, joined by Robert Segovia. Robert, how are you doing? How was your spring break?
I'm doing well. My spring break was pretty good. Just relaxed a little bit and, hung out with the family, some friends. It was a great time, kind of like Thanksgiving, a short break, but much needed. And I'm ready for the second half of the semester. How about you?
Yeah, Thanksgiving minus the turkey. I had a relaxing time myself, and but there's no relaxing on this show because tomorrow starts the NCAA tournament, the much anticipated NCAA tournament. Brackets are, I'm sure, pouring into all of the sites where you can submit them, but it is kind of funny because I want to start off the show before we get into everything. We'll go region by region and try to break not each matchup, but some of the more interesting matchups down as we go along. But I do want to start by saying that it really wasn't that long ago that the FBI investigation took place in the college hoops world and really shocked everyone. Robert, you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so the FBI investigation, a lot of college basketball teams were impacted. There was corruption in the NCAA. People were trying to figure out what was going on. And Andy Miller, the founder of ASM Sports and an agent of many players in the NBA currently, issued 4- and 5-figure payments to high school and college players to come to schools. And under Miller, there were coaches, assistants, marketers, financial advisors, all of whom steered players to their colleges. And, there's a lot of people in the NBA, in the NCAA that were impacted by some of the money that was flowing in. And, it was kind of interesting to see all the schools that were listed in the report. And you have some schools like Duke, Kentucky, Michigan State, Kansas, Louisville. The list goes on. All of the teams in the bracket that you usually think of in March Madness were on this list. And, what do you think was so interesting about that going into March Madness?
Well, when you look at the list, you have a lot of perennial contenders on this list. I mean, you're talking, Duke, Carolina, teams that are always there. And it is funny, most of the players, the individual players that were listed in the report made the tournament. Colin Sexton from Alabama, Wendell Carter's at Duke, he's playing. Kevin Knox will be playing for Kentucky, Miles Bridges at Michigan State. And Eric Davis Jr. at Texas, the two that didn't make the tournament, Brian Bowen at South Carolina and Benny Boatwright at USC. But I think, when this report came out, it sent shockwaves, through college basketball. And, I pay attention to college basketball all the way through the season. So I don't know if I was really surprised because, whenever you talk about college athletics, there's got to be something going on at certain programs. It happens in football. And, then we talk about, well, should we pay these college players? that's a whole nother story. But wasn't surprised about the report, was kind of surprised about the particular teams involved. And really, Sean Miller took most of the heat. He was caught on wiretap, apparently, talking about payment for DeAndre Ayton. He's denied it. He sat out one game, but he's back. His team's the number 4 seed in the South region, and it seems like a lot of people have forgotten already, which, I'm excited to start this tournament already, put that topic on the back burner, at least for now, something that does need to be addressed, after March.
Yeah, there's a lot of teams on here that you try and think about, hey, if the FBI and NCAA work to get some of these teams off March Madness and, penalize them for their participation in this scheme, you wouldn't have a lot of the, teams that make the tournament so great. And there's one team here in particular that you want to look at, Stephen?
Yeah, USC. I know there was quite a bit of talk about them because they were left out of the 68-team field. And I saw a tweet by the USC beat writer Joey Kaufman on Twitter, basically saying that USC, they had an RPI of 34. They were the highest ranked major conference team ever left out of the NCAA tournament since it expanded to 68 teams. The first year of that was 2011. So it's been a while. High RPI. What do you make of RPI, and does that shock you in any way?
Well, I was thinking USC was definitely deserving when I saw RPI of 34, and there were many teams investigated by the FBI, like I said, who did make the round of 64. But I can see why the NCAA cut them when I looked into it a little more. Looking at the Pac-12, Arizona was really the only big team that was a powerhouse. I mean, you have UCLA and Arizona State, obviously, in the play-in games.
Yeah, we saw what happened to UCLA already. So,
yeah, and Arizona State possibly. But who knows what other teams in that conference could have actually made a run in the tournament, and USC might have had the best chance out of UCLA, USC, and Arizona State. But the fact that they were overlooked was simply a strength of schedule situation. They didn't win any top 25 games, and they lost all of those, 2 of them against Arizona and UCLA. They had a significant win over number 7 Kentucky, so that's why they got in. Arizona State also making some wins in the bigger picture, but that's primarily why I say USC didn't make it.
Yeah, you bring up an interesting point and a very solid point, because if you take a look at RPI and just some of the statistics that are floating around out there that are typically new, quadrant 1 wins was the first, that's the first time I had heard about this, the importance of having a quadrant 1 win in the selection process just this year. So it's brand new, and I feel as though the eye test needs to be used a little bit more, especially in terms of maybe an Oklahoma State getting in over an Oklahoma. Now, we all know Oklahoma's in the tournament. They'll be playing Rhode Island, and Oklahoma State's left out. There was also talk, Oklahoma State being involved in the allegations with USC. Was the committee trying to, get back at those schools in any way? I doubt it, seeing as though there's tons of them that are in the tournament with decent seeds. So I don't think that was the case. But you make a good point, with like Oklahoma State. They beat Oklahoma, okay? They beat Kansas twice, Oklahoma State did, and at West Virginia they won. Now, Oklahoma started off the season on a hot streak. Trae Young was the hottest topic on, every website, every sports-related website at least, and he was just having a killer year. And then things started to take a turn when they hit the meat of the Big 12 schedule, and they ended the season on a really sour note. So what do you make of that decision by the committee? And, the numbers, to me at least, don't add up.
Well, like you said, Trae Young was a big part of the entire season, not just at Oklahoma, but in the entire NCAA. When you're talking about the NBA draft, Trae Young was highly touted. He was projected to go in the top 5, possibly number 1. And that's because Oklahoma was on such a hot streak. But the fact that they, sort of collapsed towards the middle of the season and the end of the season, and Trae Young is such an integral part of that team, is a big reason why I don't think they should be in the tournament. But I do see why they included Oklahoma, because everyone wants to see Trae Young. You have to give the viewers something to look out for. Everyone knows Trae Young now, and they're going to want to see him in the tournament. If he wasn't in it, would it be a little less interesting? I mean, there's so many teams, but yeah, it would be. And I think Trae Young gives a big boost to Oklahoma in the tournament. I don't know how far they'll go. We'll talk about that later, but I think that's why they included them.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense to include Oklahoma. You said Trae Young's star quality in and of itself is reason to turn the television on, and that's exactly what the NCAA is trying to get you to do. We talk, this whole scandal with this money going to all these players, yet the NCAA is the one raking in the big bucks. So, you put a guy like Trae Young in the tournament, that's instant viewers, and so that's good for the organization. We're gonna start with the South bracket, but I do want to talk about Notre Dame, because they were listed as the first team out of the tournament, meaning that if Davidson had not won the A-10 title, it would have been the Irish in the tournament in one of the play-in games. Robert, what are your thoughts on that?
I love Notre Dame, the football team. Not so much in basketball. I'm a bit of a Purdue fan. I kind of switch a little bit because I'm from Chicago. There's no real good teams over there. But, I would have loved to see them compete in the tournament, just like Oklahoma. Everyone wants to see these teams in the bracket. And it becomes a question of, how do you separate who gets in? I know you're going to look at each conference winner and say, okay, they get an automatic bid. But outside of that, you have all these bids going to the top conferences like the SEC, the ACC, all these big teams getting in, and they're going to be a big factor in the tournament. But, I mean, there's some mid-major teams that might have made a deep run in the tournament, but they didn't get a chance because they didn't win their own conference. So how do you base your decision off who makes it? What do you make of mid-majors possibly getting more bids?
Yeah, it's a flaw in the system, and it just stems from history. I mean, you put a Power 5 school up against a smaller school, and you look at their schedules, and of course the Power 5 team is going to have the more impressive resume just based on opponents. They have more shots at higher quality opponents. So you look at a team like Middle Tennessee State, who happened to lose in the quarterfinals of their conference tournament, and they could probably knock off a lot of the teams in the field. But just based on conferences and where you fall and who you are, if your name is Trae Young and you're Oklahoma, the tournament might not want to put in a Middle Tennessee State over an Oklahoma, for the simple fact that you could say, okay, well, Oklahoma's beaten a top-tier team. Who is Middle Tennessee State played? Is it their fault? No. Middle Tennessee State, they could try to realign, conferences, but that's always a process, involves a lot of paperwork, I'm sure, and a lot of people. So that's really not an option, at least at the moment. And it's sad to see that a team that has a ton of ability, miss out. And Notre Dame, coming from the ACC, is a team that has all kinds of shots, on a week-to-week basis to beat some of these big teams, but they were without Bonzie Colson for 15 games. He was the preseason ACC Player of the Year and missed those games with a broken foot, and they were also without point guard Matt Farrell for 5 of them. Yet, they still beat Syracuse in the Carrier Dome without either of those guys, and they lost by 1 to North Carolina without them. So Syracuse is in the tournament. Somebody explain this to me.
Yeah, you're right about that. And how do you dictate which teams make the bubble are worthy of being in the tournament? You have to look at their wins versus top 25 teams. You see how well they played in their own conference. And that's where you get into RPI, where they take a look at strength of schedule and conference wins and big wins. And I mean, Notre Dame was 1-7 versus top 25 teams. They had a pretty poor conference record. And like you said, Syracuse was definitely worthy of being in the tournament, and so was Notre Dame, and they happened to pick Syracuse. But for me, I would have picked Boston College. They weren't even talked about. But Boston College beat Duke when they were number 1. They had another win against a top 25 team, and they missed the tournament, and they missed the bubble. They weren't even talked about. And that's just a testament to RPI and the flawed system of the NCAA. And Notre Dame did have a loss against a mid-major team. And that mid-major team happens to be, Steven, why wouldn't you say it?
Ball State Cardinals.
Ball State. And that's the reason why I ranked them lower than Boston College, and a good reason why they shouldn't have been included for me.
Yes, Ball State unfortunately goes down on Notre Dame's books as a bad loss, but I tend to not think of it that way. But we'll chalk it up as that and move on to the NCAA Tournament 2018 edition. We will start in the top left corner of the bracket. That is the South Region. Virginia, the overall number 1 seed. What do you think about that and their outlook, seeing as though they lost one of their big freshmen?
Yeah, I think that's going to impact Virginia a lot in the second round, especially when they play Creighton. Not so much in the first round. I think that's a cakewalk. But Creighton is fast, and they get on the ball really well, get inside. They play such an efficient game that I think it's going to be a crucial, close game at the end that Creighton can win over Virginia simply because of that lack of depth.
So you've got Creighton over Virginia. We're into the first couple of picks, and already we have a pretty major upset. Yeah, DeAndre Hunter for Virginia fractured his wrist. He's out for the NCAA tournament and then some, but that won't matter. Problem is you're talking about the 6th man of the year in the ACC. And he was the only other player, to receive a vote for Rookie of the Year in that conference other than Marvin Bagley. So you're talking about a very talented individual and somebody who provides them with some sort of depth, because in the ACC tournament, Virginia was rotating 8 players. And really, even a couple of the fringe players were playing, 10 minutes. It was really their starting 5. Mm-hmm. So now you take a lockdown defender and pretty talented offensive player away, and their depth is certainly a question mark, and I think could affect them in the later rounds, although I don't see Creighton getting to them. I actually have Kansas State to beat Creighton in the first round anyways. Okay. Do you see any other potential upsets or teams that might not be seeded necessarily according to their ability?
Well, continuing with Creighton, I have them beating Virginia, like I said, in the second round. In the Sweet 16, I have them beating Arizona and getting to the Elite 8 to play Cincinnati. So that's one of my upsets. Another one that I have is Davidson over Kentucky. I think Davidson is playing like they did back when they had Steph Curry. I think they can make a big run, to be lost in the second round versus Arizona, but still that's a upset in the first round. And then Loyola Chicago, I have them going to the Sweet 16. I think that they are good on both ends of the court. You have a defense that ranks top 5 in the nation against points per possession, and their offense has 5 players over 10 points. So they have perimeter shooting over 40%, very efficient on offense, and I think they're going to get to the Sweet 16 with wins over the Miami and Tennessee. Yeah,
Loyola of Chicago is one of those dark horse teams that just has a ton of experience. They're smart with their decisions, especially on the offensive end, and really a team that sets up well, seeing as though I think that they play pretty weak opponents given the seed in Miami and possibly Tennessee. So the bracket sets up nicely for Loyola of Chicago if they can rely on their experience to get them through. But I do want to go back up to the 5-12. You know, that's historically the upset matchup. You got two Wildcat teams, Kentucky and Davidson. If Kentucky pulls through in that game, it's going to be because of Shea Gilgeous-Alexander. I mean, the guy, athletic, had a great SEC tournament, and just really starting to come on. That whole entire team is starting to play at their full potential for Calipari. But if you put Kentucky through in the bracket and say Arizona beats Buffalo, which we'll also talk about, Kentucky and Arizona, that's a very interesting matchup, and I want to get your opinion on that.
Well, before I, saw Davidson and Kentucky went through the matchup, I had Kentucky versus Arizona, and I still had Arizona beating Kentucky. I think Arizona is going to rise to the occasion with DeAndre Ayton. He is, for me, the number one pick in the upcoming draft. I really like his game on the inside and his ability to play, inside defense. And I think that's going to get them to the Sweet 16, potentially lose to Creighton like I have in my bracket, and then Cincinnati, the eventual winners of that region.
Yeah, DeAndre Ayton plays beyond his years, and you're talking about a Kentucky team that's still very young. They were dealing with, the struggles of young players throughout much of the season. So you put a team like Arizona, make smart, passes on the off. They don't turn the ball over a ton. They can play in the post through Ayton, and that presents a tough matchup for Kentucky. And really, we've got Buffalo here at the 13 seed, the lone MAC bid in the tournament. They're impressive. However, they really got a rough go of it, seeing as though Arizona's a 4 seed. I mean, I think we can agree that Arizona's probably better than a 4 seed, especially when you see Tennessee at the 3 line. I think Arizona's better than Tennessee. That's opinion, but I think they've proven that they have a better team, more depth than Tennessee does, and better offensively. But yeah, Arizona and Buffalo. I mean, Buffalo just. I think, and you talked about it. We talked about it before the show. Why don't you talk a little bit about, if Buffalo were to have had a different matchup, what could have happened?
Right, exactly. I think that Buffalo is really good. I watched them in the MAC tournament, and I thought that the play by Massenberg, Nick Perkins, Jeremy Harris, they were really good at rebounding, getting multiple chances, and scoring on those opportunities. And if they had an opponent like, just going off of the different regions, if they had Wichita State as the other 4 seed, if they had Auburn, I'm not going to say Gonzaga, but if they had those other two, I think they could have gone to the second round, and potentially in the East, specifically, if they beat Wichita State, they could have beaten Murray State and possibly gotten to the Sweet 16. And you have a matchup between Buffalo and Alabama. Who would have saw that? Well, we didn't get to see that and we won't get to see that because Buffalo is in the South. And I would have liked to see them play a different team in the first round.
Yeah, the only good news for Buffalo is that most of the guys that you just mentioned are juniors. So they'll be back next year. Ball State will be fighting against those very same guys that we saw come to Worthen this season. But yeah, Buffalo really got a rough go of things. Texas is the 10 seed in the South. They'll be taking on Nevada, who faltered in their conference tournament game. But Texas, they have that big man in the middle, Mo Bamba.
Well, I think that you're talking about Nevada and Texas, and I think Nevada is too good for Texas. They are, they're really good when it comes to scoring fast. Like I talk about Loyola getting to the Sweet 16. I think Nevada's going to do the exact same thing, and that's because they play efficiently in a fast-paced game. And in college basketball, you need that to win. NBA, you can take it a little slower, but I think that a fast-paced team like Nevada can definitely make a big push.
Yeah, my worry for Nevada is simply, Bamba's a force in the interior of that defense for Texas. And so if Nevada can't get shots to fall from outside, they're going to be in a world of trouble. If Texas wants to slow the pace down, Nevada's going to be in some trouble. So I actually have Texas moving on, and then Cincinnati seems like a pretty logical pick, pretty much to go all the way through to the Elite Eight. So they're in my Elite Eight along with Virginia, and I have Virginia winning that potential matchup in the South to round out that section of the bracket. Any final thoughts before we move on to the West?
Well, just to give the, Sweet 16 Elite Eight, I have Cincinnati beating Loyola, Creighton beating Arizona, and then Cincinnati beating Creighton. So I just think Cincinnati is the best team in that bracket.
Right, Cincinnati definitely a team that's great on defense. Their calling card is defense. But this year they've been able to score the ball at a much higher clip than in previous seasons. So we'll see if Matt Cronin's team will be able to make it to San Antonio. Moving on to the West, we have the Xavier Musketeers as the 1 seed. Surprising, Robert, given that they didn't win their conference tournament?
That's the surprising part, but I mean, watching Xavier all year, they're like Cincinnati, one of those teams that wins a lot, and you expect them to go far in the tournament. But just looking at Xavier in the bracket, it's going to be tough for them. And I think that momentum would have come in hand if they would have won their own tournament, and that would have given them a big boost in March Madness. And that's the only thing that I have against them. I think they can make a pretty deep run, but what do you think about the Musketeers?
Well, Xavier's stuck in the Big East with Villanova. So you could have said, okay, you got two 1 seeds from the Big East. However, Xavier didn't get to play Villanova because they couldn't get past Providence. So that raises some eyebrows, a ton of concern for me. And I actually have Xavier falling. If Florida State can get past Missouri, granted you've got Michael Porter coming back for them, but they got to get him involved more in the offense. They got to run their style, not just give him the ball. I know he's a lottery pick, but you saw it hurt him in the SEC, not title game, but SEC tournament. Really, if they can't figure that out, I see Florida State cruising there. And then Florida State's going to give Xavier a really tough game. And I see Florida State with their guard play. I mean, they have size, experience. 8 guys average over 7 points a game. And they're not relying on the 3-ball, which a lot of these teams that we're talking about upsetting, they are. So if their shot's not falling, they can still find ways to score. Like I said, Providence beat Xavier just last week. Could happen again. So I think Florida State could really stun a lot of people, make it to the Sweet 16. Aside from that matchup, though, I really don't see a whole lot in this region that would really, be really considered an upset aside from Ohio State and South Dakota State, another 5-12. You got to pick them somewhere, and I left the upset out of my picks for the South region. I'm going to put one here in the West. I think South Dakota State can get to Ohio State. Ohio State's been off for, 2 weeks? So rest is one thing, but you don't want to be stagnant. And I think they might be in that territory. They've got a great coach, Chris Holtmann, but regardless, I don't see that happening. Plus the games in Idaho.
And you talk about Idaho. I was talking to you before the show started about locations of some of these games, and I never really took that into consideration because, I have the bracket in front of me on ESPN, and they don't have the locations of these games. You have the old school bracket.
Yeah, I printed mine out.
Printed out bracket, going through each matchups and making some of your decisions based on location. What do you make of that matchup in Idaho?
Yeah, no, I just think Ohio State, they're going to travel well wherever they go. However, I just think that, it's a later game. And hey, the crowd usually likes to get behind the underdog. So if that's the problem with the West region. We have a San Diego State and a South Dakota State. That doesn't help me. But no, if South Dakota State can hang around in that game, you get the crowd behind you. We saw it last night. St. Bonaventure played UCLA in the playing game. They got past them because the Bonnies brought a ton of people to Dayton, and they the home crowd, that's what did it. So I think that the crowd and really the location, it's funny. Some of these teams have to travel all the way across the country to play, and I don't think that favors them. And you combine that factor with, like I said, Ohio State's had a long layoff, and I think South Dakota will be hopping into the next round. They are I believe the Jackrabbits.
And how about South Dakota State versus Gonzaga? Do you see them falling to Gonzaga or pulling off the upset and playing Xavier?
I like the thought of it. However, Gonzaga has a very easy draw coming from the fourth seed in this region, especially if Florida State can get by Xavier. Gonzaga's chalk all the way through to the Elite Eight for me.
Same here. I have Xavier and Gonzaga. Also, South Dakota State making it to the second round. Another last upset actually is Providence over Texas A&M, which isn't really an upset.
Mini upset.
But yeah, I have North Carolina getting to the Elite Eight with Xavier, and it's pretty straightforward, the 1 and 2 seed there. And then for me, I have North Carolina making it to the Final Four.
Yeah, I think North Carolina has a pretty easy path, at least up until they play Michigan. Michigan's a tournament team. They're one of those squads every single year that they're just, when the tournament comes around and it's March, they're playing their best basketball. Doesn't matter what seed they are, Michigan's dangerous. And Carolina needs to be aware of that, but I think they will be. It will be a good game, but I think the Tar Heels can get through that game and shouldn't have much problem with the national championship rematch, Gonzaga-Carolina. I think Carolina will be poised to make it to another Final Four this season as well, perhaps beyond that, but we'll get there later. But yeah, that's my West. I've got Gonzaga and Carolina as my two teams in the Elite Eight. We'll be right back on the Fantasy Express. We'll take a quick break and get to the second half of the bracket, wrap up with our Final Four predictions, and hopefully by the end of this, we'll have a national champion for you to consider. So we'll be right back after the break.
Hey, Dr. Phil here. I help people solve difficult problems every day, but one problem has me stumped: childhood hunger. Nearly 16 million children in America struggle with it. Luckily, the Feeding America network of local food banks collects surplus food, giving hope to hungry children and their families. But they need your help. Join me in supporting Feeding America and your local food bank at feedingamerica.org.
Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
Me, a cat moving in with a new human. It took a little getting used to. She has these weird games she likes to play, like this giant feather. She sticks it in my face. I swat it away. She sticks it in my face. I swat it away. It's almost like she thinks I enjoy it. But seeing how much fun she gets out of it, well, I guess it makes it all worth it. Humans.
A person is the best thing to happen to a shelter pet. Be that person. Adopt. Brought to you by the Ad Council and the ShelterPetProject.org.
Bill Belichick says we're on to Cincinnati, but here on the Fantasy Express, I'm going to say that we are on to the East region of the NCAA tournament. Villanova is the 1 seed in this region, and a lot of people's pick to win it all.
Well, yeah, Villanova has a pretty easy path, you would think. But, I mean, this region has my most upsets in a while in March Madness picking for the past few years. I have Alabama beating Virginia Tech first, and off of Colin Sexton's play, because, I mean, he's been really great, especially in the SEC tournament.
I mean, he's getting paid for his play, right?
Well, we can't, say that, but yeah, he is. We already know it. And Alabama is going to make it to the Sweet 16 and possibly the Elite 8, because I think they're going to beat Villanova, and, they're going to beat Marshall. Also, okay, Marshall, I have them beating Wichita State, which could have been Buffalo, like we talked about earlier.
Yep.
Marshall beating Wichita State, Murray State beating West Virginia, Marshall beating Murray State to get to Alabama, and then Alabama making it to the Elite 8 versus Purdue. And then on the flip side of that East region, I have the Bonnies beating Florida, because Loyola beat Florida. And so, that goes
naturally.
Yeah. I think Florida just sucks. So the Bonnies make it versus Texas Tech in the second round. And Purdue is just going to have a cruise down that bottom side. They're going to have to play Butler, like you're talking about Butler being a big threat to Purdue, but I think Purdue can ultimately overcome that and just win the region and make it to the final.
Right. Well, I had to throw in there, the whole Colin Sexton thing just to get your reaction. But have you been getting enough sleep lately?
I have.
Just okay. All right. Just checking, because there's a lot of upsets in there. You just rattled off. We're talking Marshall and Murray State and the 11 seed St. Bonaventure all advancing in this region. So
just got to go with it sometimes.
Okay.
And we see it every year. Our brackets, we think, oh yeah, this higher seeded team, better record, and it always happens where one region has the most upsets. I picked the East. So this year, hopefully this can bring me some gold, some big bucks, but that's why I always have 5 brackets.
Okay. All right. Fair enough.
This is mine for WCRD, though.
East, you heard it here. Robert Segovia is coming after you. I think there's certainly some upset potential here. I tell myself 2 things every single year, and it usually doesn't work, but I try to stick to these 2 rules. One is don't go for too many first-round upsets, because usually the real upsets are the ones that, 1, the media is not talking about, and 2, the seeding just wouldn't prompt you to pick it. We're talking 2 seeds versus 15s, 15 knocking off a 2. That's happened. And 3 and 14s. So those are typically the ones, we look back over the last few years, Michigan State, Iowa State come to mind as having burned me in the past. So those are the real upsets. I try to have one of those every year. And in this region, I will give you Marshall. I think Marshall has a really good chance of knocking off Wichita State. They run up and down the floor. I read somewhere that their average pace of play or average possession time is 14 seconds. I don't know who's keeping track of that, but my condolences to whoever's got the stopwatch out there on the court. No, but they like to fly up and down. Mike D'Antoni's brother is actually the head coach, so it makes a ton of sense. They probably don't play a lot of defense. Can't say I've watched Thundering Herd basketball anytime lately, but I think Marshall can do it. Wichita State, they're not as focused on the defensive side of the ball. Really, other than Landry Shamet, I can't think of somebody that will be able to run up and down the floor with Marshall. So I think Marshall's a great one. But West Virginia, a team not exactly like Marshall, but engaged on both ends of the ball and likes to press the other team. So I don't like the matchup there for Murray State. I'm going to go with the 5 seed West Virginia, and I actually have West Virginia making it pretty far. I see down the road a potential matchup with Villanova, and if West Virginia can get Jalen Brunson out of his game, the solid standout point guard for the Wildcats, and Jay Wright, I think West Virginia could sneak past the Wildcats and upset a ton of people and get the recycling companies to work, because there's going to be a lot of paper in the garbage can.
Yeah, I say Alabama and Marshall in the Sweet 16, but looking back, it's really tough to go against Villanova, West Virginia, all these good teams. I'm going to stick with it. I'm not going to go back on what I said, but I'm just looking at it right now, and there's so many upsets in my region. But yeah, I think that West Virginia can definitely make a play against Murray State and get to that game against Marshall. But even if they do, I think Marshall's too strong to lose that second round matchup. And I think Villanova, they're gonna run into Sexton, and he's gonna light them up. I feel like he is the big reason why they get to the Elite Eight.
I mean, if he's going, you're talking, you can look up and down this bracket and pick out some teams with guys that have game-breaking potential. I mean, Trae Young, we talked about him at the top of the show. He's another one. I mean, Oklahoma's a 10 seed. They're probably going to be facing Duke in the next round if they can get past Rhode Island. He's another guy. So, yeah, Colin Sexton, I mean, he had a tremendous SEC tournament. And the thing that's great about him is that he doesn't seem to be really a 21st century kind of player, in that he's not forcing things. He's not forcing up ridiculous threes. He's playing through his offense and with his teammates. If he can get them incorporated into the game, takes the pressure off of him a little bit, and things could fall Alabama's way, and they could give Nova a run for their money if they get past Virginia Tech. I don't think they will. Virginia Tech's pretty deep. And Buzz Williams, talk about an analytics coach. He's going to try to have all the answers for Colin Sexton, and if they can limit him, I don't see Alabama having a chance. But you never know. That's why they play the games, right? But then another thing is, I was talking about filling out my bracket. Typically, the big upsets, I try to have something that happens down the road, in the Sweet 16 going into the Elite Eight, or maybe a surprise Final Four team. And this is really the side of the bracket that I see that happening if it does. Because towards the bottom, I have Florida beating St. Bonaventure, because I think the Bonnies, which, by the way, the St. Bonaventure Bonnies, Robert, I mean, that's one heck of a name.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites, along with Central Michigan, the Chippewas.
Chippewas, yes.
That's always fun to say. But, man, I mean, that's creative, isn't it? Just like going off of their own school name. Hey, Bonnies, that's what we are. I don't know what else they could have been. Maybe like the Eagles, or, something else.
The Tigers, something super generic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But they're very creative with that.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the best names in college basketball. Right up there with the Cardinals, because chirp chirp.
Oh yeah, and I'm a huge fan of the St. Louis Billikens. I've always liked that one for some reason, but they're not in the tournament. St. Bonaventure is. They struggled with UCLA, and really UCLA, when they were playing, they had some moments there where they were going on runs and playing up to their potential, and when they were, Bonaventure couldn't keep up. It was until they went to they had to go to the 1-3-1 zone. UCLA had absolutely no answers for it. I think Florida will. You're talking about Chris Gioza, a great point guard. You've got, three guys that shoot over 40% from deep. And, that's really the solution to any kind of zone. So I think Florida won't have any trouble really with St. Bonaventure. And I've got them really taking on Texas Tech and knocking them off. And then towards the bottom, Purdue, a team that a lot of people have interest in naturally. But they, in the Big Ten tournament, I watched every single game that they played, and, results are results. They made it to the final game, but Michigan really took it to them, and they almost lost to Rutgers. Purdue, for whatever reason, they've got 2 7-footers that can't rebound on the offensive side of the ball. And really, the defense, I feel as though it's almost, everybody likes height and size, but when you're another player on Purdue and you see these big guys under the boards for you, I'm not saying you're not thinking about rebounding, but you're probably thinking, Isaac's got that one. And then when he doesn't, you're giving up 20 offensive boards a game. Rutgers out-rebounded them like crazy. Michigan did it. That's a problem that they have. And I think it's not going to be bad enough to not get past the 15 seed, but I think Butler's going to get past Arkansas. And Butler and Purdue in Detroit, that's going to be a great atmosphere. I think Butler can do it. There might be a smaller team, but they have a lot of willpower and a lot of fight. And it's just going to take, I think, that edge to knock off Purdue, and I see them going down. So really, between Florida and Butler there, my Sweet 16, I have Florida moving on. Their experience is really great. And West Virginia and Florida, kind of a weird matchup for me, but West Virginia making it to the Final Four out of the East.
Wow. West Virginia, that's really interesting. I have Purdue coming out of that region, but I just want to touch on Purdue. You're right. They have all of this talent, and we saw it last year. They had Haas and Swanigan, and you would think, hey, get all these rebounds, turn it into easy points, but they can't. And it was a problem last season, and it's a problem this season. I actually thought they were better last season because they had Swanigan, and they have a lot of returning members, P.J. Thompson, both of the Edwards, Isaac Haas, and I think that their play on the perimeter and their defense and rebounding is what should get them to the Final Four and eventually the national championship. But I mean,
right. You're exactly. I mean, if they do what they're supposed to do,
it's a lock.
Exactly. But it doesn't happen with this team for whatever reason. And I don't watch a lot of Cal State Fullerton. I couldn't point that out on a map if you gave me a map of California. But if they are a good offensive rebounding team, I wouldn't be surprised if that's a really nail-biting game, because Purdue just doesn't do it. And they don't get the ball on the offensive end. They don't get it in Isaac Haas. And all of a sudden, you're shooting all these threes. I believe against Rutgers, Purdue took more threes than twos. They're a good three-point shooting team, but within the flow of the game. They have to dictate flow, and when they can't, they're in real trouble.
Yeah, I really hope they can dictate the flow, because they should be one of the best, if not the best team in the tournament. And they should have been ranked higher last season, and they're ranked high this season. So they have a lot of people looking at them, but they really need to capitalize on all their opportunities. And hopefully they can. I think that they can and beat Alabama in that Elite Eight matchup. But those are my thoughts on the Boilermakers.
Yeah, the Boilermakers have a target on their back. We'll see what they can do, but I just don't think that they've got what it takes. I have West Virginia again, rounding out the East region, and finally we're gonna transition to the Midwest region, the last region, not the last, but definitely not least, because we have the Kansas Jayhawks at the 1 seed, and really, before we get to that, you got the South region, the West, the East, and no love for the North, Robert.
Well, the North is kind of the Midwest. You have the East and the Midwest. You don't really think about the North unless you're talking about the Raptors. We the North.
Or the Civil War.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah. Well,
wow.
That's the last time. I mean, hey, Midwest, we're going to go with it. It's in Omaha, Nebraska. At least the final games are. And Kansas has some home cooking. They're playing in Wichita, and then they just go a state over. So it works out for them in terms of location.
Yeah, Kansas has a straight shot all the way to the Elite Eight for me. It is pretty straightforward in this region. I don't have many upsets like I did up, in the East, but Kansas has a few matchups against NC State and Auburn that I think are going to be, a little tense for them. They're going to have to play really well in those games. Auburn, they're going to play New Mexico State. I think New Mexico State can beat Clemson. Michigan State also has a straight shot to the Elite Eight game. And then playing them, Duke, they're going to have to play Trae Young. And I think that Trae Young can overcome the Blue Devils. Just like Sexton in the East, I think that Trae Young is going to light it up in March Madness, get to the Sweet 16, lose out against Michigan State because, let's just put it this way, Michigan State has Miles Bridges. And who else did I say earlier that was going to be a big threat?
For Michigan State, Jaren Jackson.
But what was the problem with him?
He can't stay on the floor. He usually is in foul trouble.
Yeah, and I don't see that being a problem in this region. I think they are going to make it to the Final Four versus Purdue, a Big Ten matchup in the Final Four. And do you see any... Oh, before I hand it over to you, I have TCU losing against whoever wins in that play-in game.
Yeah, so do I. I really don't think it matters. TCU at the 6th seed, they look vulnerable. Didn't get past Kansas State in the Big 12 tournament. That's kind of a red flag for me with them. But going back to the 5-12 matchup again, I think New Mexico State matches up really well with Clemson. The game's in San Diego, so guess who's closer? New Mexico State. You're talking about Clemson going all the way cross country, and that could do it. So I think New Mexico State, they're really tremendous defensively. They're 4th in the country in rebounds per game, 10th in points allowed. I mean, I know they're playing in the WAC, but the extinct football conference, it seems like now. But yeah, no, New Mexico State's a real player, and I think they can knock off Auburn, who lost to Colin Sexton in Alabama. So potentially New Mexico State could take on Kansas. I don't really see New Mexico State being that big of a threat, and I think Kansas can handle them. Okay. But yeah, no, New Mexico State, a team to watch out for. I think Auburn should get past College of Charleston, but they have a very slow pace of play that usually slow wins out over fast. As long as the fast team can't get in transition, okay. I think it's easier. If I were coaching, I think it would be easier to slow the other team down, because at least when you have the ball, you can, say, all right, we're going to hold off.
That's what should happen with Purdue.
Hey, Mike Bray at Notre Dame perfected the burn offense and took teams out of their rhythm. I think in today's college game, slow really throws some teams off. So College of Charleston, maybe, but I think Auburn will get through that one. Yeah, we talked about TCU that next game, and then Michigan State has a pretty easy road, so we could see Michigan State against Duke. Everybody's looking forward to that.
Yeah, I think that Michigan State won't play Duke because I have Oklahoma in that game.
Yeah,
but
well.
if Duke does make it, I think that Duke can pose a big threat to Michigan State and really mess up my bracket and a lot of other people, because you look at all of the picks around ESPN, around the other sports websites. I'm not going to go through them. CBS Sports, Bleacher Report, you get it. But they all have Michigan State. They love the Spartans.
I'm never going to forget Middle Tennessee State and Michigan State. You can't let that go. At least I can. I haven't moved on from it. So I've moved on from it enough to think that Michigan State can make it to the Final Four and actually the national title game, because, they have all the talent. They have 3-point shooting, a physical presence down low. Nick Ward, fantastic player in the post. Some guys off the bench that can shoot threes. Tum Nairn, talk about a name Hall of Famer, coming off the bench playing lockdown defense. So you've got a ton of guys on Michigan State, and really Duke, that game's going to really determine if Michigan State can make it. If they can get past Duke, it'll be tough. But I think they will. I've got them obviously getting to the Final Four in the Midwest. And I think the Midwest and the South are the two regions with a ton of talent and really some seeds that kind of don't make sense, but I guess in a good way, because it's going to give us some great television over the next couple of weeks. So moving on to the Final Four, we kind of touched on it throughout the show, wrapping up here. Robert, who are your 4 teams?
I have Cincinnati, North Carolina, Purdue, and Michigan State. For Cincinnati, they literally just need to play their style, and they can guarantee themselves a spot in the Final Four, because the rest of the South will ultimately destroy themselves. Lack of depth from Virginia, an overuse of Ayton from Arizona, coupled with the lack of good teams that Arizona plays in the Pac-12, will get Cincinnati a bid in the South. And then North Carolina looks so good with Luke May that they really impressed me in the whole ACC tournament. Purdue, well, I'm biased because I'm a Purdue basketball fan, so I obviously have them in, but because of what I talked about with all their players and the fact that they have the potential with defense and rebounding, that they can make it too with their 3-point shooting. And then Michigan State, they're my pick to win the Midwest. Hopefully Duke doesn't make it over Oklahoma and trip Michigan State with Grayson Allen. But yeah, I have Michigan State winning the Midwest.
That's a conversation for another day. But yeah, no, just to recap my teams, I have Virginia out of the South. I think that as long as they can, figure out a way to manage the depth on that team, manage minutes correctly, they should get through. North Carolina, just play through your guys, Joel Berry, Theo Pinson, Luke May. We've touched on them. West Virginia, Daxter Miles, another great name, by the way. Daxter Miles, good shooter, and their point guard, Javon Carter, both seniors, both experienced. Hopefully that'll get them through in the East. And then I have Michigan State, for the reasons I just mentioned, in the Midwest. So, Robert, your national champion, you want to tell us?
Well, I have North Carolina beating Cincinnati because Cincinnati didn't really get much work in the South. So they're going to face a big North Carolina opponent. North Carolina takes that game, and then on the other side, hopefully Purdue can play their game, get all the way here, and then beat Michigan State for a spot in the national championship. And then ultimately, I have Purdue winning it all because, I've got to go with my team. So
because why not, right?
Right.
Yeah, no, I'm going to go with the North Carolina Tar Heels to repeat. I just think they're well coached. They've been there. They have talent, talent to burn at this point. And plus, I think the bracket sets up well for them. They might not win it, but I think they're one of the best bets to get deep into March. So I like the Tar Heels, and that's that. So it's the hour's flown by. It's already it's about 3 minutes to the top of the hour, Robert. So any last thoughts, anything you want to say before everything kicks off tomorrow around noon?
Well, just going into my other brackets I'm going to make, I'm definitely going to take location into consideration, and I am going to look at some of those upsets that I made in the East. But that's all I've got.
All right. Well, Robert will be up very late making all of his selections, I'm sure. But for now, we're going to go with Purdue for Robert, North Carolina for me. We'll find out soon enough. We'll be back next week to talk about really what happened. Hopefully we can get in some baseball and some NFL too. But talk about what happened, and hopefully our teams are still around so we can talk about them some more. So tune in next week. We'll be back on the air, same time, 6 o'clock next Wednesday. Thanks for listening. This has been the Fantasy Express on WCRD 91.3.